Hello and welcome to the Leathercraft Masterclass podcast. And it has been quite some time since I created a dedicated podcast, hasn't it? For some of you who've been following me through the years, may have noticed a lull in the podcasts as I focused mainly on video, which is, kind of what I do really. But a lot of people have been quite vocal about bringing the podcast back and coming up with new and exciting material to talk about. And recently I visited a couple of places and I have some opinions on English leathercraft as a whole that I thought, you know what, this would make a brilliant podcast. Now, don't forget, right now on leathercraftmasterclass.com, I am giving away a free video on hand stitching. That's something that a lot of you beginners ask me a lot of questions about, so I created a video just for you, leathercraftmasterclass.com. I'll link it below on YouTube so you can go check it out. Enter your email and I will send you the video straight away. So I went to London. I like to have a little bit of a day trip up there every so often, which is where I'm from originally, so it's my old haunt, so to speak. So occasionally I like going up there. It's about just over an hour away from where I live in Kent. And walking around town, I believe it was near New Bond Street, is Picket London. And I was walking by. I've never actually been in, and I didn't know where in London they are. I just know they're a London leather goods maker specializing in traditional English leather goods. And I was walking by. It was near the Burlington Arcade. And I thought, I recognize that brand. And I looked in the window and I saw various briefcases and attaché cases. So I went in and had a look around. It was really interesting because I've repaired some of their work in the past, but I've never really gone and had a good look at their kind of body of work and all the different things that they produce. And if ever you're in London, Picket London is a great place to, if you're into leather goods, which I'm assuming you are if you're listening to the podcast, if you go in and have a look, you're absolutely going to love it because there is so much that they do in leathercraft, from board games to tableware, but also if you're really into bag making, traditional English bag making, attaché cases, briefcases, doctor's bag, top frame briefcases. They produce so many different varieties. If you go on their website and take a look at what they actually make, there's so many different varieties. They don't really specialize in one thing. They just do a lot of stuff pretty well. So it was good to have an up-close encounter with it, with their work. And they were good and bad. One thing I did notice about Picket, as much as I do like them, is there is more variance from, and this is just personal opinion here, but there is more variance from case to case, and you can tell this was made by this type of craftsman, this was made by this type of craftsman, and you can often tell just by looking at the small details in the handles. You can tell this batch was made by one person and this batch was made by another person, so there is a little bit of variation to it. I wouldn't say that it was the highest quality or the best example of British leather goods out there, and I'll talk a little bit about who I think is the best as far as larger brands go, not traditional individual artisans, that kind of thing. I'm talking about big brands here, so I'll mention who I think is the best coming up shortly. But Picket London is one of those brands. They still keep a very traditional edge to their work. It might not be the most expensive. They're definitely not the most expensive. In fact, considering the cost of some of these cases, under £1,000, which is very rare for that amount of handwork, even if it's not all hand stitched, a lot of the work is still traditionally done by hand, and handles and things like that and attachments are still hand stitched. But bringing that in under £1,000 with a well-known brand name, you're not going to get the highest possible quality. So that's kind of understandable. It does say made in England, so whereabouts in England they're making it, I'm not entirely sure. But so I think it really depends on which craftsman has been making it, because some of them were very good and some of them were just kind of okay. Some of the stitching was a little bit, even considering the price, a little bit lackluster, but that's just the way I saw it. Now, another brand that I've always admired over the years is a very, very old brand from the 1700s. I can't remember their exact date of when they came into existence. I'll put it up on screen. But Swain Adney Brigg is probably what I would say is my favorite producer of leather goods. Alfred Dunhill is not too far off. Some of the work is really nice, but you don't get to see a lot of Dunhill's work. A lot of it is commission work and not something that you'll see on their website. But Swain Adney Brigg is probably overall my favorite. They really, really do keep things traditional. Now, I went through the Burlington Arcade and I remembered that they were in there. And this was my first time visiting them, bear in mind. And I went in, and one thing I noticed is they no longer call themselves Swain Adney and Brigg. They just call themselves Swain. So they've recently gone through a rebranding.
Perfect. So everything we do in store, from the hat, which is Herbert Johnson's, to everything is all handmade in our workshop. Okay. We do more of customization. If you say, oh, I don't like what I've seen, I want to have my own design, this is where we work together with you to bring it to life. Okay. So all these cases are made in the UK? Yes, in Cambridge. In Cambridge? Yes. Ah, that's interesting. I thought they were made in London. It's in Cambridge, sir. Cambridge, okay.
So why is the Adney being dropped? It's just the Swain.
I know, it's because the new owners, they've just rebranded everything. But in terms of quality of everything, if there's anything, it's getting much better. So nothing has changed whatsoever. It's just rebranding. I don't know why they just, yeah, I think that.
Which is quite interesting. And one thing I noticed in the window was a lot more contemporary pieces. So I think this is an example of where a traditional brand has gone, you know what? We're just not getting a lot of young people in the newer generation buying attaché cases, soft-sided briefcases, folio cases, document cases. They're just not perhaps buying them. And it's more the older generation and for nostalgia reasons. And overseas, I know English leatherwork is very popular in places like Japan. So they're obviously kind of branching out and trying to create more contemporary work. And I don't think it's made in the UK. I don't know where it's made, but I didn't recognize the hardware. Some of the cases you can recognize, it's the locks are Liston locks from Abbey, England. The handle attachments, the D-rings and things like that. You can tell that it's Abbey, England that they're using, which comes as no surprise because I know of no other lock maker or hardware maker in the United Kingdom. There may be, but not that I know of. But this new stuff seems to be made for Swain Adney Brigg rather than by them. But that's, it didn't say made in England on any of the pieces. So it's interesting to see them coming out with something that's new, something that's definitely more modern. But what they are doing is keeping the more modern pieces with one foot in the past, with, very traditional looking, but also very modern, having a kind of a modern feel to it. So I went inside to have a look. And I've dealt with their cases before, mostly in restoration, that kind of thing. So I haven't really touched any of their modern stuff. And I have to say, from all the cases that I looked at, the handles, the stitching, the edges, everything is very, very consistent with them. But you're now talking, £2,000 up for a soft-sided briefcase. I think it's going to be around £4,000 for an attaché case. This isn't small money. This isn't Pickett money. This is Swain money. So obviously, it's a step up, but very, very consistent. Some of the construction methods for the handles did differ from bag to bag. I noticed that some of the handles was a one-piece wrap, and some of them were a two-piece, which is two separate parts, which is something I recently did in a course, the full wrap briefcase handle. But consistency-wise, it was absolutely spot on, and I really love the look and the finish that Swain bring to the table. Now, I was accosted by one of the salespeople when I was in there, and it's a very, very small shop. If ever you go in, it can't be more than, saying that it was 10 feet wide would be generous. It's a reasonably long shop, but it's very, very narrow. I'm not exactly sure why, but when you go in there, you're going to get a salesperson on you pretty quickly because it's small. And she was kind of taking me around and showing me different cases and different styles and things like that, and talking about how they've gone through a recent rebranding, which was quite interesting to listen to. But one thing she did mention was that their pieces are still made in England, but in Cambridge, which is quite interesting. I thought, much like Dunhill, they were still made in London, but it seems that their work is still made in Cambridge. I don't know if Swain are having a company make their stuff for them, or they are making it themselves. I'm really not sure. I know Alfred keeps things in-house, Dunhill keeps things in-house, but I'm not sure if Swain is kind of a brand that just gets other companies, other factories to produce their work and then put it under their own branding, or if they're keeping it in-house. Hopefully they're keeping it in-house, because that's more interesting to me. It's a little bit like watches having an in-house movement rather than a movement from another manufacturer placed inside with their branding on. It's always more authentic when it's one company producing everything. Of course, they can't necessarily produce the leather, though some luxury houses do own tanneries. Hardware, things like that has to be usually outsourced, but as much as they can, keeping the craftsmen in-house, keeping the designs in-house, and the whole production in-house, is always a bonus when I see that. They didn't introduce the designs, they didn't create the attaché case, they didn't create the doctor's bag, the top frame briefcase, the folio case, all the handle designs or anything like that. They just produce those really, really well. And that's something that I could see even up close for the price. They're just stellar. They're at the top of their game, I think, when it comes to English-style leather goods. And the handles, which for me is the telltale. If you can pay attention to the details to that level, you're dealing with a good brand. Now, there are some pieces that they produced where I noticed the handles were actually not hand-stitched. And in order to hand-stitch a handle with such a unique design, such as this, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, something like this, it's just absolutely impossible to stitch that with that kind of design with a machine. You have to stitch that by hand. I'm sure perhaps somebody will invent a machine that can do it at some point, but right now you really have to tone down the filler or make the filler non-existent, so there is just one thick, long piece of wrapped leather, and then it is stitched by machine. You can see some of the handles, I think it was on the little wine, I guess they're called wine trunks, these little boxes that open out on a hinge, and on the inside, on one side you have glasses, on the other side you have wine bottles and all sorts of accessories for a picnic. Beautiful pieces, but you can see that there's a little bit of cost cutting going on the handle. Perhaps, the people that buy these, they really possibly don't care. And it's just someone like me or you who's a little bit more of a purist will pick up on these kind of little details. But it was interesting to see that some of the briefcases that I've seen online by Swain, not necessarily in the shop, but are also starting to use these machine-made handles. Now, obviously, there is going to be some component of creating them by hand, as in cutting the leather or having it cut and then wrapping it and gluing it and things like that. But the traditional finish is always hand stitched. And the way they get around it is just to take out the filler, which is a real shame, because to me, the filler, when creating a handle, is something that there should be just enough of to create that almost overall spherical feel when you pick it up. So it looks kind of lumpy and bumpy, and there's bits sticking out, and it doesn't look like a cylinder, but when you hold on to it, it feels like it is. It's very difficult to describe, but seeing a handle without that completely was quite interesting. And for me, this is one of the hardest parts for leather goods makers, is the filler, because it's such a great way of showing off your craft and your craftsmanship level. It's creating a piece of leather that goes inside a handle that's then wrapped. And if you create that piece and it's not perfectly symmetrical, it's not smooth, when you wrap it with thin leather, you're going to see that. So many craftsmen go to great lengths to really nail the shape of the filler. Even you've perhaps seen craftsmen where they'll use several layers of thin leather, but the leather is multicolored. So you can almost see it like a topographical map, where it's raised and where it's lowered. So you can kind of take a little bit off here, a little bit more off there. But I do find filler on handles is a little bit like adding salt to a meal. There should be just enough, and it takes skill to say no more. Or even other flavorings like garlic, for example. You can really overdo it. It should be an accompaniment. It should almost be a case of it's barely there. It's not even that noticeable, but it brings the whole dish together. And sometimes you can see handles where people have really used too much filler on the inside. It ends up looking quite bloated. What it feels like in the hand, I'm not entirely sure. But what it looks like on the outside is a little bit more like a humpback whale. And I think that is really getting away from the traditional look of it. And that might be perhaps where people's tastes are going. That could be people's tastes are changing. I don't know. But for me, I just love the look of a traditionally made handle with just enough filler in there to give it that 3D look, but also a nice, comfortable feel in the hand. And seeing that Swain Adney Brigg are still producing this high level of handle was quite nice to see. But it's also interesting to see them now kind of moving away from that. And I don't know where that's going, because their new stock of products seems to be produced overseas. And that may be true, that may not be true. It may be all made in England for all I know. But it didn't look like it was produced in the same factory. It had a different look, had a different feel. It was a little bit more blingy, had a little bit more pizzazz in the design, as a breaking away from the traditions, but keeping certain parts of it traditional looking. So that was my day out. Absolutely incredible to see these two giants in the British leather goods business. And I thoroughly recommend, if ever you come to London, to visit both of them, because they are literally next door. You could throw a stone and hit the other one. They are that close. So yeah, that was my day out. Those are my thoughts on each one, their merits, the pros and cons. And I'd recommend, if you're listening to this on a podcast, go and check out the YouTube channel, because I'll throw up some images, which I'm sure you want to see as well. Now, don't forget, right now on leathercraftmasterclass.com, I am giving away a free video on hand stitching. That's something that a lot of you beginners ask me a lot of questions about, so I created a video just for you. leathercraftmasterclass.com. I'll link it below on YouTube so you can go check it out. Enter your email and I will send you the video straight away. And that's it, folks. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next podcast.
You're giving me wind and rain.